Have you ever found yourself sitting quietly in your living room, heart heavy, wondering how your relationship with your child ever came to this point? You raised them, you sacrificed for them. You poured your heart into giving them a better life. And now, years later, it feels like all you're getting in return is silence, sharp words, or a deep ache in your chest that just won't go away. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many parents over 60 carry this silent burden, trying to make sense of a relationship with an adult child that no longer feels loving or safe. You might find yourself walking on eggshells around someone you once cradled in your arms. You question whether speaking up will cause more distance. And deep down, you may wonder if love is supposed to feel like this: strained, one-sided, and painful. The truth is, as we get older, our peace becomes more precious than ever. We don't have time for games, guilt, or emotional roller coasters. We deserve relationships that nourish our hearts, not ones that slowly break them. That's why today we're having a very important, and maybe a little difficult, conversation. We're going to talk about 6 toxic phrases that, when spoken by your adult child, may be the clearest signal that it's time to take a step back. These aren't little misunderstandings or differences in personality. These are phrases that show a deep lack of respect, emotional manipulation, or a refusal to grow. And when these words keep showing up, it may be a sign that you need to protect your heart and create healthy distance. And before we go any further, I want to say this. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you've failed as a parent. It doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you love yourself enough to say, "This is not okay." It means you're wise enough to recognize when love is no longer being returned in a healthy way. Let's begin with one of the most painful, yet common things a parent can hear from their adult child. "You were never there for me." At first, hearing this might feel like a punch to the gut. Maybe you want to argue. Maybe you immediately start defending yourself, replaying all the nights you stayed up late waiting for them, the lunches you packed, the jobs you worked, the tears you shed when they were hurting. Because you were there. Maybe not perfectly, but you showed up the best way you knew how. Now, it's one thing for a child to express their feelings or share painful memories. That's part of healing. But when this phrase is used over and over again, not as a way to connect but as a weapon, it becomes emotional blackmail. It's a way of keeping you small, guilty, and forever indebted. It erases all your efforts and paints you as the villain in a story you never asked to be in. And here's the worst part. No matter what you do to make up for it, it's never enough. The more you give, the more they take, and the more they remind you of how much you supposedly failed. That's not a relationship, that's punishment. If this phrase keeps coming up, and it's wrapped in blame rather than a desire to heal, it's time to ask yourself, are they looking for connection or control? You can apologize once, you can express your love, but you don't owe your life to a version of the past that only exists in their mind. If they're not willing to see your humanity, your sacrifices, and your current efforts, then they're not trying to build a relationship. They're trying to dominate one. And that is not love. Let's move on to another phrase that sounds casual at first, but carries a heavy emotional weight. That's just how I am. Deal with it. Have you heard this one? Maybe you've tried to talk to your child about the way they speak to you, the way they disappear for months, or how they snap at you over the smallest things. You express how it hurts, you try to open up, and all you get in return is, "Well, that's just who I am." This isn't honesty, this isn't self-awareness, this is emotional laziness. It's a refusal to reflect, grow, or even consider that their behavior is hurting you. And in a healthy adult relationship, whether it's with a child, a spouse, or a friend, growth is part of the deal. We don't stop evolving just because we turn 30 or 40 or 60. We keep learning, adjusting, caring. We try to do better. When someone says, "That's just how I am," what they're really saying is, "I don't care how my actions affect you." And that, dear friend, is not acceptable. Not from anyone, and especially not from someone you've loved and supported for decades. You may have told yourself, well, they've had a hard life, or they don't know how to express themselves, or they're going through something. And all of that might be true, but it doesn't excuse cruelty. It doesn't excuse disrespect. If someone is old enough to say, that's just how I am, they are old enough to understand that relationships require effort. You are not asking for perfection. You're asking for kindness. And if they can't give that, or worse, refuse to even try, it's okay to say, I love you, but I will not accept this. That doesn't make you cold. That makes you wise. And here's something else to remember. When people care about you, they care about how they make you feel. Even when they mess up, even when they don't know how to fix it, they try. And that effort means everything. Now let's talk about a phrase that can leave you feeling both confused and deeply wounded. I don't owe you anything. It's hard to even say that out loud. To imagine a child looking at the person who fed them, clothed them, sacrificed for them, and saying, I don't owe you anything. That kind of statement cuts right through the heart. Let me be clear. Children don't owe their parents for being born. We don't bring children into the world expecting a return on investment. But what they do owe, like all people, is basic human decency. They owe you respect, gratitude, a willingness to see you not just as mom or dad, but as a person who loved them the best way they knew how. When your adult child says, I don't owe you anything, it's usually not about independence. It's about dismissing the entire relationship. It's a way to shut you down, to silence your feelings, and to avoid responsibility for how they're treating you. You're not asking for a medal, you're asking for mutual respect. And if that's too much for them, then you have every right to take a step back, to protect your peace, to say, if this is how you speak to me, then I need some distance. And that's okay, because love without respect is not love. It's control, and you deserve better. Let's pause here. This is a heavy conversation, and if you're feeling emotional right now, it's completely understandable. These are not easy things to hear or think about, especially when they involve people we love more than anything. But as hard as this may be, it's also an act of strength, of clarity, of reclaiming your worth in a season of life where your heart deserves peace, not pain. Sometimes the most painful part of these conversations isn't just the words themselves. It's the realization that someone you gave your life to, someone whose birthday you never forgot, whose scraped knees you once kissed, whose tears you wiped, can speak to you like a stranger, or worse, like you're a burden. And that brings us to another phrase that's far more common than people like to admit. It's subtle, but it carries a sting that lingers. You're too sensitive. You may have heard this when you tried to express a feeling, maybe something they said or did that hurt you. Maybe you just needed to be heard, not judged, not fixed, just heard. And instead of listening with compassion, they shrugged and tossed your pain aside with those 3 words. You're too sensitive. Let's call this what it is: emotional dismissal. It's not just about the words. It's about what those words are used for: to invalidate how you feel, to make you question your reality, and to shift the blame away from their behavior and onto your emotions. And when this phrase is used often enough, it creates a dangerous pattern. You start to silence yourself. You stop bringing things up. You begin to doubt whether your hurt is even valid. You start walking on eggshells around your own child, worried that anything you say will lead to criticism or coldness. That's not communication. That's control through gaslighting. Because when someone tells you that your emotions are too much, what they're really saying is, your boundaries make me uncomfortable. Now, does this mean we should never self-reflect? Of course not. All of us, no matter our age, should be open to growing, to learning how to express ourselves better. But there's a difference between self-reflection and self-erasure. And too often, when you're being told you're too sensitive, you're being pushed to erase your feelings just to keep the peace. Let me offer a thought here. Sensitivity is not weakness. It's awareness. It's empathy. It's what makes you human. And if someone in your life, especially your own child, can't make space for your emotions, then it may be time to take a step back and protect your heart. Now let's talk about something that feels like it comes out of nowhere. But once it's said, it leaves a crack that's hard to mend. I didn't ask to be born. Some parents hear this during a heated argument, or in a moment where they've tried to set a simple boundary. And it's one of those phrases that hits like a slap. It strips you of your love, your care, your effort, and reduces it to an accusation. Let's take a deep breath here, because I know this one cuts deep. For so many of you, becoming a parent wasn't just a chapter in your life, it was your life. You worked long hours, skipped vacations, lost sleep, said no to yourself so you could say yes to them. You did your best. Maybe not perfectly, but with every ounce of love you had. So when your child throws that line at you, "I didn't ask to be born," it's not just hurtful, it's unfair. It's a way of making you responsible for every discomfort or disappointment in their adult life. It erases their responsibility and places all the weight on your shoulders, no matter how old they are or how many chances they've had to make different choices. Let me tell you something that needs to be said more often. You do not deserve to be blamed for someone else's refusal to take ownership of their life. We all start somewhere. And yes, maybe your parenting had flaws. Every parent has regrets. But being born is not a trauma you caused. It's a gift, even if your child hasn't learned how to see it that way yet. You don't have to accept this kind of emotional rewriting of history. You're allowed to say, "I did the best I could with what I had." If you want to talk about the past, let's do it with respect. But I will not be shamed for giving you life. And if that kind of respectful conversation can't happen, if every attempt you make is met with sarcasm, blame, or emotional attacks, then it's okay to step back. It's okay to stop explaining yourself to someone who has already decided you're the villain. Now, there's one more phrase we need to talk about, and this one can be tricky. Because it doesn't always come out sounding harsh. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence, in distance, in neglect. It's not always spoken directly, but it's felt in every unreturned call, every missed holiday, every cold shoulder. It's this unspoken message. You don't matter unless I need something. And that one breaks hearts quietly. You see it when your child only calls when they want money, or help with the kids, or support during a crisis. But when you need something, even just a little company, a ride to the doctor, a birthday phone call, they're suddenly too busy, too tired, too distracted. And over time, you start to realize that the relationship only flows in one direction. You give, they take, and when you're empty, they disappear. I know some of you have spent years trying to earn love from a child who only sees your value when they benefit from it. You've bought gifts, sent cards, offered rides, babysat grandkids, all in the hopes that maybe this time it will build a real connection. But let me say this as gently as I can. Love that only shows up when it's convenient is not love, it's transaction. And you were not put on this earth to be someone's emotional ATM. A relationship with your child should not require you to constantly prove your worth. And your worth does not depend on how much you can do for others. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to stop showing up for someone who never shows up for you. This doesn't mean you stop loving them, but it may mean you start loving yourself enough to say, "I deserve more than this." Because you do. You've made it this far in life, through decades of highs and lows, joys and heartbreaks. You've carried more than most people will ever know. You deserve peace. You deserve kindness. And you deserve relationships that feel like home, not obligation. Let's take another deep breath together. This conversation hasn't been easy. But sometimes the truth we avoid is the truth we need most. You don't have to beg for love. You don't have to apologize for existing. You don't have to keep pouring into people who only show up when their cup is empty. You can make a new choice. You can choose peace. And peace sometimes begins with walking away from what no longer serves your spirit, even when it hurts. There's something especially heartbreaking about feeling invisible to someone you love with your whole heart. You may sit quietly on your porch, sipping your morning coffee, staring out at the trees, and wondering, how did we get here? Not with anger, not even with regret, just with that deep, aching sadness that comes from loving someone who doesn't treat you with the care you deserve. And that leads us to the sixth and final phrase, perhaps the most subtle, but also the most dangerous. You owe me. Now this one doesn't always sound the same. It can come dressed up in guilt trips, passive-aggressive remarks, or emotional debts that keep growing no matter how much you've already given. Maybe it sounds like, after everything I've been through, the least you can do is, or, you're my parent. Isn't that your job? And suddenly, you're not just their mother or father. You're their lifetime servant, their emotional safety net, their built-in support system, no questions asked. No matter your age, no matter your needs, no matter how tired you are. You see, the idea that you owe your adult child anything beyond love, respect, and honest communication is deeply toxic. It creates an unbalanced dynamic where you're always giving and they're always taking. And when you finally set a limit, suddenly you're the bad guy, the selfish one, the ungrateful parent. Let me say this clearly. Parenting is not a life sentence of emotional servitude. Yes, we give to our children, often more than we give ourselves. But once they become adults, the relationship must evolve. It must shift from dependency to mutual respect, from obligation to appreciation, from demand to dialogue. If your adult child believes you owe them your money, your time, your space, your silence, without ever considering your well-being, that's not love. That's entitlement. And it's not your responsibility to carry that. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say, I've done enough. You are allowed to say, I love you, but I will not be used. Some people might say, but family is forever. And yes, blood may be forever. But peace? That's something you have to choose and protect, even from the people you love most. And sometimes walking away, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually, is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Because here's the truth. Love without boundaries is not love. It's survival. And you, dear friend, were not meant to merely survive. Not at this stage in your life. Not after everything you've already endured. You were meant to thrive. To feel free in your own home. To wake up with lightness in your heart. To know that your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your peace is sacred. You see, for so many people in your generation, love was always tied to sacrifice. You were taught to give until it hurt, to put others first, to hold your tongue and keep the family together, even if it was breaking you in the process. But just because that's how things were, doesn't mean that's how they have to be now. You've earned the right to protect your peace. You've earned the right to say, I will not be disrespected. You've earned the right to love your adult child and still walk away from behavior that chips away at your spirit. And yes, it might hurt. It might feel unnatural at first. You may even second-guess yourself. But I want you to remember something. Setting a boundary is not the end of a relationship. It's the beginning of truth within it. And if your child ever chooses to come back, with respect, with accountability, with a willingness to grow, you'll be there. With open arms and a heart full of love. But not with the same silence. Not with the same self-sacrifice. This time, it will be different. This time, it will be mutual. Because you now know what it means to value yourself. Before we end, I want to say this. If you've experienced even one of these phrases, if you've felt small, erased, used, or unloved by your own child, please know that you are not alone. There are so many people walking this same quiet road, carrying the same quiet ache, and the courage to speak about it, to seek support, to say, this is not okay. That courage is a beautiful beginning. Maybe your child will change. Maybe they won't. But either way, you are not powerless. You still have choices. You still have worth. You still deserve peace. And peace is not selfish. Peace is survival with dignity. Peace is where healing begins. So if you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. Not a sign to stop loving your child, but a sign to start loving yourself just as fiercely. Your value does not come from what you give. Your worth does not depend on how others treat you. Your heart, your wisdom, your story, they matter. So take that step, even if it's small. Maybe it's saying no to the next demand. Maybe it's writing a letter you don't send. Maybe it's sitting in stillness and reminding yourself that you have done enough. You are enough. If this video spoke to you, I invite you to share your thoughts below, tell your story, or simply say, "This helped me." Because when we speak out, we give others permission to do the same. And sometimes, just knowing we're not alone can lift a weight that's been sitting on our chest for years. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life, where every week we create honest, uplifting content for people just like you. Because growing older doesn't mean growing silent, it means growing stronger. Here's to peace, to courage, and to living your best life at any age. You deserve that, more than you know.